Thank you all. And this morning is more like a conversation rather than necessarily, sorry, I'm trying to get my slideshow started. Here we go. Rather than necessarily a presentation. So what I'm going to do is sort of present a couple of things and then come back to everybody, and we can have a little bit of a conversation about whether ABCD, so asset-based community development, whether it aligns with the international community development standards. So I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on this, and seeing, yeah, where are the overlaps, or what is it that we can do to strengthen our ABCD work so that it maybe does align a little bit more with the standards, or does ABCD go beyond the standards? So let's think about those as we go through. I'll just go over. I love that beautiful artwork there by Emma Constance. So I thought I'd just share that with everybody this morning. So what is community development? And we've just sort of spoken about what it means to each of us during check-in, but this is actually the International Association of Community Development, or IACD. This is actually the definition that was co-created by members globally, I think back in 2013 or 14, I think it was. So as you can see there, it says community development is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes participative democracy, sustainable development, rights, economic opportunity, equality, and social justice through the organisation, education and empowerment of people within their communities, whether these be of locality, identity or interest in urban and rural settings. So it's a bit of a mouthful. I just want to leave that with you so that as we go through the rest of the session, that's sort of in back of mind. Oops, sorry. Oh, what's happened here? Sorry, guys. I've just realized. Oh, there we go. So, what are the international standards for community development? So there are actually 8 standards which are up there on the screen now. So for me, it's starting with that putting values into practice, engaging with communities, ensuring participatory planning, organising for change, learning for change, building leadership and infrastructure, developing and improving policy and practice, and of course promoting diversity and inclusion. So they're quite large, large statements. And what does that actually mean? What are some of the elements? Like, how do I understand what, ensuring participatory planning is, or any of those 8 elements? And I'm really happy that Dee and I are actually involved in a project at the moment where we're breaking down each of these 8 standards with a group around the world, so that we're actually creating a CD reader talking about what do each of these standards mean in practice, rather than just the theoretical basis. Because if we have a look at each one, and this is sort of the idea that was behind them when they were developed, you'll see on the little chart that I've got there, we sort of have each of those themes, so the 8 areas, and during the development of those 8 areas, there were some key practice areas that was sort of, developed for each one of those themes. So I won't go through them in detail, but just pick out some key points, So, we think about understanding and engaging with communities, enabling communities to take collective action. And that's certainly one of my favourite. But also in that enabling communities, there's that supporting people and organisations to learn together, so that we actually all go on the journey together, as well as facilitating organisational development, but also supporting community members into leadership. And obviously, that little bit that we quite often forget is about that, evaluating in that, what's informing practice and policy for community development. And interestingly, in Australia, we're one of the few Western nations that actually doesn't have our own specific community development organisation or own national. We have some small communities of practice around the country, and some even smaller, community development groups, but we don't have a national body. So now when we think about, okay, that's sort of the theoretical context and the 8 principles from IACD, or the 8 standards, we think about ABCD. And as we know, the glass half full analogy of, yes, we understand that communities have deficiencies and needs, but what we look at in ABCD is, what is it the communities have got? What are those capacities, assets, gifts that actually exist within communities and its citizens to help us get the good stuff and to really support local initiatives? So I think a few weeks ago we spoke about what ABCD was. So I thought I'd just remind us, and we'll have a look at some other elements as well. So it's about that, focusing on the assets and strengths of communities, rather than the problems and needs. So it's not saying that we ignore problems and needs, but it's about focusing on what we've got to get to what we need. And clearly, one of the keys to that is actually identifying and mobilising communities and individual assets, skills and passions. It's built on community leadership, and it builds relationships. So that's a bit of an overview of what we've discussed in previous weeks. So when I was putting together the slideshow, I was going back over some stuff from the ABCD Institute, and I'd actually not seen this slide, and I thought, actually, I'm going to add this because I think it's really important that we actually acknowledge that, that neighbours do know about their local assets because they use them every day. But successful neighbourhood action comes from when we connect those up, when we connect those individual things that are happening in community, when we bring them together to connect the assets, and to acknowledge that connecting doesn't happen on its own, that there needs to be a connector or connectors that actually that actually build those connections and build those relationships. And those connectors should always be from within the community, not an outsider doing to community. And so when I think about ABCD, it's about that power progression from from within communities. So moving communities from maybe that sort of victim to client, and powering up the ladder so that communities are actually, as it says there, the cultivators, the producers, the makers of what happens in their communities. And for me, ABCD is a tool to help build that capacity, and the learnings and building relationships in communities for that to happen. And it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So that leads me to the discussion. So does ABCD align with the community development standards? And where are, when we think about what we know in ABCD and the language that we use and some of the tools that we've discussed over the last few weeks, you know, think and reflecting or looking at those 8 standards, does that speak to ABCD, or does ABCD speak to them? And where are some of the areas that we may be able to strengthen what we do in our ABCD work to align more with those standards if we need to? So I'm going to stop sharing now. So over to you guys. What do you think? You know, can you see? Actually, I'm going to backtrack and just go back to. Oops, why can I not go back? And go back to those actual 8 standards. Has everybody seen them before? Were you all familiar with them? No, I can see some heads shaking. So you can actually access, there's a whole publication around the standards. I've just sort of pulled out what they are and that the table for brevity, but it actually goes into each of the standards a little bit more to give you a little bit more background or more understanding of what each of them, the idea between each of them when they were being developed. So I'm just going to leave that there for a minute so you can all just have a read over it, and then let's start the conversation, because I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are, and I'm just about to write a paper for uni about how the standards can influence development in Aboriginal communities. So I'm really interested to see what the intersection between that and even ABCD is. So let's get back out of there and oops. Okay, thoughts? Oh, thanks, Dee. Dee's put the link in for the actual standards, which were announced in 2018 at the World Community Development Conference in Maynooth in Ireland.